Welcome to Totally Over the Spectrum, where we dive into embracing autism through understanding and support. Welcome to episode 6, the autism diagnosis, and that is your wheelhouse.
Yeah, been there, done that 3 times.
Okay.
So we're going to talk about the process of getting a diagnosis, the importance of getting a diagnosis, and then we'll talk about some misconceptions and the fear of labels, because that's usually a big topic that comes into play when people are thinking about getting an assessment done.
Yes, absolutely.
So first we'll start with the basics. How do you get an autism diagnosis? So the process is almost the same for kids and adults, but for children, usually you go to your family doctor and you ask for an autism assessment, and then they send you to a developmental pediatrician because you need to be that high level in order to do an autism assessment. It can't just be done by anyone, right? You really need to be trained specifically in autism to be able to give a solid assessment.
And to make sure that they're meeting the criterias, all the criterias of that assessment.
Right. The developmental pediatrician usually has a team of professionals like a speech and language pathologist, maybe a physiotherapist and an occupational therapist, and they're all doing assessments. You fill in a lot of questionnaires before you go, so you get a lot of parent input, and then the team do activities with the child, and then they combine all the results together to give you their findings.
And this process has to align with the DSM-5, the framework in which has been put into place for them to make this type of diagnosis.
Right. So the DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual, and that's used to assess all mental health issues. Autism just is one of the components of that, and its current iteration is, I think, 5.
Yeah, absolutely.
As an adult, the process is, as an adult, what I've done is the same kind of process. So I went to my family doctor. I said, I think I'd like to have an autism assessment done. And I had a very good doctor who said, yes, we can absolutely do that. Some people, I've heard a lot of stories where doctors don't do it. They don't send you through. So I had a very good doctor who just said, she said, I'm not going to send you to anyone in this area because I don't think anyone in this area is qualified enough to be able to give you a good assessment. So she actually sent me to CAMH in Toronto, right, which is the leading mental health hospital.
Amazing.
Right?
I'm a huge supporter of them.
Right? So she sent me there, and she said, it's about a 2-year wait list. And I said, yeah, I'm good with that. And she goes, well, you've waited this long, right?
So, absolutely.
Yeah. So that was amazing for me. I had a really good experience. Not everyone does.
Okay. And I think a lot of parents and people need to know that, especially as an adult, if you're not going to have your diagnosis done privately and paid for, be prepared for wait lists.
Yes, you can pay, but I couldn't afford the cost. It's quite steep. So I was willing to wait. But yeah, you can have all of this done privately. I have no idea what the quality of private assessors is, right? That's probably very specific to each and every one. I'm sure the quality is hit and miss. But that's something you could definitely look into. Then the process was the same. After 2 years, I had to fill in some questionnaires. I had to have a person present with me who had known me when I was young, because part of the assessment for autism means that all of the I'm going to call them symptoms, all of the traits need to be present in childhood, not just in adulthood, because autism is present since the time you were born.
Yeah.
Right? And then we could do it virtually, so I chose for the virtual option, and I met with a psychiatrist, and we did activities together, and they asked me a lot of questions, and then they came up with a formal diagnosis for me.
Now, going back to you going through this whole process, I think people need to know that your mom was present for part of the diagnostic procedure.
Right. So I needed someone present with me who had known me since childhood.
What was your mom's feedback to you or her perception of the whole process?
Well, I mean, so I was 50 when I had my assessment done. So my mom is from a different generation, and I didn't grow up in a very supportive household to begin with. So she was not terribly pleased with me, and she did criticize me after the assessment was done a little bit, almost like you were faking it kind of thing. And I mean, that's just, I'm used to this now, right? Like that's what I grew up with. It was not supportive. It was not a safe space to be autistic. I have really high masking because of it, which is a topic that we will get into later. But yeah, it's not everyone has a supportive family.
And also touching base on that, you said that generation don't have a strong belief in, and you don't air your dirty laundry. And mental health in her era was taboo. You never claimed to have mental health, nor did you ever seek help for it unless you were a severe case. And if you were, 9 times out of 10, you were institutionalized.
Yeah.
So
she would have been part of a generation where autism was considered to be the parents' fault.
yes, absolutely.
Right? And it was caused by cold parents, which we know is not true. But yeah, she would have grown up with that sort of stigma.
So I just wanted you to bring in that perspective just so that people who are adults going into this, whether especially at your age or, to be prepared for that type of feedback from parents if they are of that generation and of those beliefs.
Yeah, I mean, that brings up an important point that we'll get into as to the importance of getting a diagnosis and what kind of feedback you get from people. I don't know if people really wanted to go over the diagnostic criteria. I thought maybe we could sort of just tap into that a little bit.
I think that's important because otherwise, when you do go through this process, it can feel, and certainly is, overwhelming. Especially when the questions are repetitive and you're needing information from additional caregivers in order they want to make sure that their diagnostics procedure is accurate and the same information is being received from all sources so that it solidifies their diagnosis in a person for autism.
One of the hardest things for me as an autistic person is filling in a questionnaire, because I need really clear, I'm no good with open-ended questions, right? So I need really clear questions. So I don't know if that's part of the questionnaire, is how well you answer the questionnaire, because it's like, I don't know how to answer this question. I don't know exactly what they're answering me. I'm always looking for the correct answer, right? And sometimes there isn't a correct answer. And sometimes it's the way that you answer the question that actually gives them the information, not the question itself.
Yeah. So don't read too much into it. Just answer the questions to the best of your ability, because the questions are placed in a manner to guide them through a process and an elimination to giving you a formal diagnosis.
And there's a sort of internet joke that is, if the assessor is not good, then when they ask you a question, they might take your surface answer and not dig any deeper. So one of the questions might be, do you have an issue wearing socks? And the person will say, no. And they'll say, oh, well, no sensory issues. And then this other person says, you have to rephrase that question, because it's not that they don't have difficulty wearing socks. It's that I have a system for wearing socks, right? So I avoid the problem of wearing socks by having a system about wearing socks, because I'm one of those people that I have socks on all the time because stepping on other things on the floor in my bare feet is sensory overload and I can't handle it. So it has to be really very hot for me to not have socks on my feet. And I will have specific kinds of socks that I'll wear, and they can't be twisted because I can't handle the seam of the sock. If it's twisted, it's not completely just on top of my foot. And if it's wet, it's gone. New pair of socks. Wet sock is bad. No, thank you. So yeah, do I have a problem wearing socks? No, because I have a system for wearing socks, right? So you can't just ask a superficial question. You have to sort of dig a little bit deeper, because I'm going to give you a no answer. No, I don't.
So you can say, well, why do you not have an issue wearing socks?
Yeah, or you have to find that way to dig a little deeper to get the actual answer for things. So if we talk about the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual, autism is considered a spectrum disorder, which means that it has a wide range in the severity of impairments. And impairments is the term that they use. There's a lot of sort of negative terminology in the way that they talk about autism in the DSM. It's basically divided into two areas: social communication and interaction, and restrictive repetitive behaviors, interests, and activities.
Yes.
So each of those is broken down into components. If we talk about social communication and interaction, the first thing they talk about is social reciprocity. So that is the back and forth conversation.
The ability, yep.
Right? So they would say, to meet a criteria of having autism, there would be, and you don't have to have all of these things. You just have to have enough of these things to pass a certain threshold. Mm-hmm. So social reciprocity would include abnormal social approach, failure of normal back and forth conversation, reduced sharing of interests, emotions, or affect, and failure to initiate or respond to social interactions. And you might say, well, it doesn't seem like you have any of those issues. Well, I'm also older and I've learned coping mechanisms for a lot of things. And I also really pretend that things don't bother me when they do, so that other people are not bothered.
So you have a very high level of masking.
Yes.
Okay.
The next part is nonverbal communicative behaviors used for social interaction. That sounds like a mouthful.
It is. And people got to realize this is a clinical approach to this, because they've got to to do an effective job on diagnosis. They have to take the emotion out of it. Yeah.
And I dislike all of this negativity, right? Like, it's abnormal, it's a failure, it's an impairment. Of course, that feels terrible, but I understand that they need to have some sort of guideline for what they're doing. And yes, they could change that terminology, and maybe at some point they will. But the underlying idea is that autism is a specific set of traits that deviate from neurotypical.
Yep.
Right?
So you'd like to see more words such as deviate?
Well, people are probably going to have trouble with any word that you come up with, really.
Yep,
right?
Absolutely.
So they could call this a difference in social approach, but now you have to quantify difference.
Yes.
Right? So
therefore, the wording that they use is a clinical, so that everybody can read it and understand it the same way.
I think so. I think that's how this is broken down, but I think there's still area for improvement. We can also talk about deficits in developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. And that's like difficulties adjusting your behavior to suit various social contexts. Mm-hmm. Difficulties in sharing imaginative play. We often see kids do parallel play and not sort of sharing that with another person. Difficulty in making friends, and the absence of interest in peers.
Yep. So those are some of the criterias as an educator. Those are red flags for us, right? And in the education field, it is a disorder that falls under communication. So, you have the DSM-5 for the diagnostics over there. So under the education umbrella, autism falls under communication.
And you say red flags, but that doesn't mean bad.
No.
Right? People think red flag, ooh, that means bad, but
No. Okay, I can call it yellow flag. Something's different.
right. These are indicators that there is something going on.
Yes, absolutely. There's more or less of what aligns with the norm or neurotypical children and development.
Right. So then the second section is the restrictive repetitive behaviors, interests, and activities. And that's just 4 different parts. So that's repetitive motor movements and the use of objects. And that could include lining up toys, flipping objects, or echolalia, which is repeating pieces, like repeating words.
Yep. Scripting what they hear and what they like, and it meets a certain need. Yeah.
Right. And I didn't think that I had echolalia, but I didn't know that it doesn't have to be verbal. You can do it in your head. And I'm like, oh yeah, I do that. So yeah, that's a thing. The next part is insistence on sameness, inflexible adherence to routines, ritualized patterns of verbal or nonverbal behavior. So they could get extremely distressed at small changes, difficulties with transitions, rigid thinking patterns, greeting rituals, the need to take the same route or to eat the same food every day.
Yep. All sensory needs there.
Yeah. Yeah. This one is a big one for me. This is like, yes, all of these, yes. The third is highly restricted fixated interests that are abnormal in intensity or focus.
Yep. And I think this is where we go on tangents over here when students with ASD have that and their ability to focus and hyper-focus on certain things. And then all of a sudden they transition to another activity and they're unable to focus on it, right? And, some people get very frustrated with that.
I get very frustrated with that.
So
it is, to explain that from an autistic perspective, if I am hyper-focused on something and someone pulls me out of that hyper-focus, it causes me physical pain. It is distressing on a physical level to be pulled out of a hyper-focus because you are so involved in that moment. And people talk about flow state. And this is also a point, is that there are a lot of neurotypical people who will identify with some of these traits.
yes, absolutely.
Right? And it's not because they have autism. It's because we do see these traits in neurotypical people, but it's the intensity of these traits that are autistic, right? Not specifically the trait itself necessarily. It's the intensity of it.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
people are like, oh yeah, I don't like being disrupted when I'm in flow state. Right. But does it cause you physical pain? No, probably not.
Yeah.
Right. So you might understand it to some level, but you need to take it further to understand what that's like for an autistic person. It's not like I can help it.
Yeah.
Right.
And this is where giving examples such as that is you're going to be able to help parents and other people relate to having a better understanding, of how you feel when you're placed into certain situations.
Right. So if a child is hyper-focused on their tablet and you say, okay, it's time to go shower now, and they've had no warning, no prep time, they didn't know it was coming, they could become instantly dysregulated, instantly. Because now they've had that physical pain of being pulled out of their intense interest, and you've asked them to put it down and go do something else. Right? So that's where you have to have strategies in place to say, like even a time, right? Like in half an hour, we're going to have to do this in 15 minutes. And sometimes that will work for some kids. And sometimes you'll need kids that just have a timer so that they can keep an eye on it and not be interrupted that many more times during their hyperfocus, right?
Absolutely.
So it is different for everyone.
Yep.
And strategies have to be different and tailored to every single person.
100%.
So the last one is a hyper or hypo-reactivity to sensory input or unusual interest in sensory aspects of the environment. So that means you could be very reactive to something or really underreactive to something.
Yep.
And that can be pain, it can be temperature, it can be sound, textures, light, smelling or touching of objects, or movement. right? So it's all of the sensory things. It can affect all of your senses, right? And again, people are like, yeah, I might not like bright lights either, right? But it probably doesn't cause you as much physical distress
Yeah.
as an autistic person, to the point where you cannot function in that environment,
Yes. Yeah.
right?
And one of the, a lot of times we have students with hypersensitivity to sound. So you will see a lot of students with headphones on, noise canceling headphones, just to dull the input of sounds coming in order for them to be able to regulate and function on a day-to-day basis.
Right. So the other aspect of this assessment is that all of these need to be present in childhood and throughout your life. But as you get older, if you're someone like me who's really good at hiding it, at masking it, you need a really good assessor to be able to pull that information out of you. Because at some point, I don't know that I'm masking it. It's just, that is just how
It's become second nature to you now.
yeah, it's partly trauma response, and it's partly survival mode, right?
Yep.
Because if you get bullied enough, if you get teased enough, if you get told that your actions are inappropriate enough, you will stop doing it, right? It causes a lot of mental health issues. There are a lot of older autistic people who have not been diagnosed, or late diagnosis, who have a lot of mental health issues because of it.
So that is one of the reasons why it falls under the DSM-5.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's all connected.
So all of these words like impairments and abnormal, failure, deficits, difficulties, that sort of leaves us with the impression that this is bad, and it isn't. It's just different, right?
It is.
I really want to promote that this is neurodivergence. It is still a normal way of being for autistic people. It's just not neurotypical.
It is. I look at people with autism as some of the most creative people out there, right? The complete out-of-box thinkers. And I've said this in past discussions. One of my greatest idols that are out there, I'm her greatest fan, is Temple Grandin, right? Here is a person who was non-speaking till, a lot later on. And
I think she was about 3.5.
Yeah.
I think.
And it was her mom who would not give up. She had a mother who just said, no, absolutely. I'm going to, be persistent in promoting you to communicate more effectively. And here's a person who, in her era, was a woman who revolutionized the cattle industry, slaughter industry, by her brilliance. It is her life story is amazing. She is hilarious. I find her hilarious. A lot of people might find her very blunt or to the point, but she sees it for what she is. And people with autism, I think, see you for who you are at your core, right? Neurotypical people know how to present themselves with a lot of frills, a lot of dressing, and they see you for who you are. And I think that is the most amazing part of, people with autism.
There is this component to autism, which is, of course, is not the same for every autistic person, because we're all different. But I know that I have this, is that I see all people as the same. So I don't have levels. Do you know what I mean? Everybody is equal to me.
Yes.
And I didn't realize that was not a thing. Like, people get really excited. They're like, oh, that person's a celebrity, right? So they hold them in some sort of higher esteem, and they might get nervous around that person. Or I've met owners of Fortune 500 companies, and I'm just like, hi, Dave, it's nice to meet you. Like that your amount of money that you have, or your your notoriety, or whatever it is, it's irrelevant to me.
Yeah.
Like, I don't see it.
Yep.
Like, and it's not like I make a conscious effort to not make that important. It's just that it isn't important to me.
It comes naturally to you.
It would never occur to me
Yeah.
that person is any different than anybody else.
Yep.
Right? I also don't have jealousy. Like I don't look at someone else and say, "Oh, you have this wonderful life or you have this wonderful thing that you own or whatever," and say, "Boy, I wish I never have that." I'm like, "Oh, good for you." Like it doesn't never occurs to me to be jealous.
Yep. It like I look at that, and as you're talking about it, I go, how incredible. How incredible. Like people don't like work so hard in practicing mindfulness to achieve that state of being, which comes so naturally to people like you. So
It can be very difficult for people to understand, and it can cause a lot of resentment because people feel like I'm now judging them because they might experience jealousy or they might experience the idea that, oh, a celebrity is someone important. And because I don't have that, they start to feel bad about themselves and they attack, right? Because I've made them inadvertently feel bad about who they are. And I don't feel that, right? Like I'm not trying to make anyone feel bad. This is just an aspect of me.
Yep.
Like I'm not trying to get it to translate to you like that. I don't have that judgment,
so therefore, me saying bluntness, right? You're polite about it, but you're still blunt about it, right? You're to the point.
I've tried to modify that a lot. I was much more blunt as a child and found that was not great.
And I think that's where a lot of adults have have communication issues with people with autism or neurodivergent people, right? It's because they're like so matter of fact and they take offense to it. It's not and I think that's where, I got to say to people, take a step back. It's not a personal attack on you. It's their way of communicating. So take a chill pill, right? And take it for what it is. And you know what? And take the opportunity to say, oh, let me look at myself. And is that really something I'm reflecting? And if it is, it is. Do I want to change that or do I not want to change that? Here's your opportunity for growth.
Not everyone has a growth mindset.
So we'll come back on that topic another time.
I'd like to talk about the importance of getting a diagnosis. So let's start with children. So I mean, I have met parents who have kids that I would say meet the criteria. Like obviously I can't diagnose, but I would say peer reviewed that yes, I would say that this child is very likely to be autistic. And parents were like, no, they're not. They're quirky. They're all these other things, whatever. And they refuse to go get a diagnosis. Or they might even say, well, they might be, but I don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. Right? They're afraid of what that might mean. And so I want to talk about, let's talk about school. So if you have a child who is presents with autistic traits, who doesn't have a formal diagnosis, and they go to school, what does that look like for them?
Well, without a formal diagnosis, you're limited to what type of support you have for them, right? Because the way the framework is set up in a school system, those with a formal diagnosis, and depending upon the criteria of that diagnosis, will receive the highest amount of care. Whether it's one-on-one, two-on-one, it depends upon their diagnosis. So when you have a diagnosis, it automatically gains you, for lack of words, front of the line. Access to, being able to access such as occupational therapists, speech therapists, an educational assistant, specialized programs, whether it be when they are younger, whether it's a communication program, whether you're a little bit, and when you're older into a CPP program. So it gives you the access to, it gives you the ability to access all of these programs with a formal diagnosis. Without a formal diagnosis, there are certain criteria we can put into place, but we're limited to what we can or cannot do because now that infringes on your rights as a person, with me saying, well, I'm going to treat you such as this because I believe you have it. And that's a no-no.
It also impacts allocation of resources within the school system.
Hugely.
And we've talked about that in episode 3 when we talk about autism and education. We've talked about it a little more in depth in that one. But if you can't get the supports at school without a formal diagnosis, like that's something parents have to consider.
Yeah.
Right? Like really, really think hard about how many years your child is going to be at school.
Well, with a formal diagnosis, your child can be in school up to the age of 21. Access those resources up to the age of 21 versus to the age of 18. So, significant amount of time and, a significant amount of resources in order to impact that child's growth and education for the future.
I feel like the more tools you can have at your disposal to help someone, why wouldn't you access that?
That is a good question. Why wouldn't a person want to be provided for, a label? If you're diabetic, do you not want to be labeled as a diabetic and receive life-saving medication?
Well, I think it's about stigma. So we'll come back to stigma. I can say as an autistic individual, people have asked me why I bothered to go and get a diagnosis at the age of 50. They're like, well, what does that do for you now? You're not in school. You've made it this far. You don't require accommodations. So why would you bother doing that? And even within my friend group, who are very supportive people, all of them, very supportive people, I've had people say, I don't see it. Like, I don't see that in you. You seem fine, right? And I've had people after my diagnosis said, I would never have guessed that you have struggles. Like, I've never seen that side of you. I'm like, yes, thank you. I'm very good at hiding that from you. But it doesn't mean when I go home after a social interaction that I don't require time to recover from the social interaction. Not because I didn't enjoy it, but because it is still draining for me, right? It requires a lot of effort to mask.
Mm-hmm.
And it is extremely tiring, and I know now that it is very unhealthy, but it is also not as simple as taking the mask off. It's become ingrained into everything I do. So I'm afraid of people's responses, right? I'm afraid of how that person is going to react to me if I unmask, because I know that previously, throughout my life, it hasn't gone well. Mm-hmm. Right? So even though I know that this is my friend, this is a safe person, are they really going to like who I am if I don't have that mask on? Right? That's tough. So I've sort of started doing it in drips and drabs, like here and there, testing the waters here and there to see how well that goes over. And I might do it as just a simple statement like, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed right now, right? Like I feel like I've reached my limit and I need to go, right? Like just small sort of things here and there, and just being open to talk about it. Like it took me, I didn't tell everyone I was going for an assessment, and I didn't tell everyone my result right away either, right? I sort of waited and did it because I would not have been able to handle a lot of input from a lot of people all at the same time.
Yeah.
So what was your reaction when I said, I think I'm going to go for an autism assessment? What was your initial reaction?
When you told me you're going for the assessment, I thought, well, it makes sense, because I firmly believe that it's hereditary. And I was like, well, if the boys didn't get it from you, they got it from their father. So for me, it was like, it's, confirmation of, that it is possibly a genetic process, right? But I think when you were confirmed, your diagnosis was confirmed, and you did say to me, well, I am confirmed with, and I have received a formal diagnosis of autism. And I went, well, what does that make me? and you were like, what do you mean? I said, well, because we get on so well. And we relate extremely well with each other. We get each other.
Yes.
And, and my kids often joke and say to me, Mom, are you sure you're not you sure you're not like got the tism? And I go, no, I haven't. And I think we've talked about this as well. And, I'm a person who likes my home and the way I do things. I'm a very neat and tidy person. Like, I need everything to be visually organized. Everything has a place, everything in its place, and it cannot be cluttered. It has to be, I need to have, otherwise I don't like it. I just get overwhelmed by it, and it's draining for me. But that doesn't mean I have autism. That's just a component of who I am. But and then we spoke about it in a bit, and because of the job that I do, and I'm around people and students with autism so much, that I put practices and procedures into place and strategies into place to help them regulate, that it becomes second nature to me. Like, I just automatically do it now. I don't even think about doing it, right? Because I know that student needs this level of, of calm in order to be operating, at optimal, right? So I put things into place based on how my student is that way. And I've been doing this a long time, where I've been able to practice, put theory into practice and get good at what I'm doing. So to me, interacting with you and stuff was like, well, it's second nature, right? And I'm a quirky personality, and so my question to you is, do you see that in me?
Well, I think it's what we talked about. It's like, you may exhibit autistic traits, but not to the intensity, not to that level of intensity that an autistic person does. There's also a lot of overlap in behavior between ADHD and autism, right? They're both part of the umbrella of neurodiversity. And I would say that you probably have more ADHD characteristics than autistic characteristics, right? I'd be interested to see what an assessment of ADHD came out with for you.
I think that's a great test.
Yeah, and I mean, it would have to be done by a professional. It's not like we could sit down and do an online 50, questionnaire thing and say, oh, yes or no. And the thing is, with doing these questionnaires, you have to be honest. You have to be really, self-aware and say, yeah, I feel like I do actually do that, right? That is a thing.
Yep.
Right? So if you're not honest, it's just not, don't bother.
It. And so people say, well, why get a diagnosis? So to me, when you said, oh, I got this diagnosis, first of all, I go, well, that's going to help you be able to access information, strategies, theories that are out there and practices that are going to help you understand your kids better, because they don't have the masking abilities as you do that you implement so naturally now. But there's more information out there that you can implement for them by understanding a diagnosis.
I really went and got the diagnosis for me.
Okay.
That's what it was for. So I'd love to say, no, I did it for my kids. No, I didn't. I did it for me. I did 100% for me. I did it because I wanted to better understand myself. But the true, if I'm being completely truthful, the true underlying reason I went and got it done is because I grew up being told I was weird. And from different people in different situations over the years, people would say, you're really weird. And I'd say, how am I weird? They'd say, I don't know, you just are, which is a completely insufficient explanation for that question. And I hate it because I need a reason why, right? I need to understand. So I was very nervous about getting an assessment done and having them come back and say, no, you're not autistic. I was much more relieved to be autistic than not, because then I had an answer why. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's the core reason, because I was told I was weird growing up and I wanted to know why. But what it's allowed me to do is to be kinder to myself, right? To say, okay, this is why I have these struggles. This is why I have these difficulties. You know, it's, I'm not stupid just because I can't remember people's names. Names are super hard for me, and I forget them. I cannot hold on to them. So it is extremely difficult.
I think that's, okay, since you brought up names, if you introduce yourself to me as Kimberly, that's going to stick. Don't change it, because I'm going to call you Kimberly for the rest of your life. So if you introduce yourself and say, I'm Miss Lewis, it's going to be Miss Lewis. It took me a long time, a very long time, to transition from Miss Lewis to Kim.
Yeah, it did. All right, well, let's chalk that one up to your possible later autism assessment for your kids.
To satisfy my kids' needs.
To satisfy your kids' needs, yeah. You'd have to go for an autism/ADHD assessment to satisfy me as well, because I think it's more ADHD. Another thing it allowed me to do is say, I'm not lazy when I need the rest of the day off after I've gone grocery shopping in the morning. Grocery shopping is a horrible experience. It is noisy. It is crowded. I have to walk around and try to find objects and maneuver around people. And I hate every aspect of shopping.
And I've had the privilege of going shopping with you.
Yeah.
A fine-tuned orchestra could not do better. I have watched you in awe of your shopping experience, and the amount of stores that we can go to in the shortest amount of time, and the amount of objects that are purchased in the shortest amount of time is incredible.
I like to be efficient. I have a lot of anxiety about money, so I like to be very efficient in how I spend it. So I know exactly which store I need to go to. I know what prices I need to be looking for, and I will go in, get what's on my list, and leave. Right? I tend not to do any sort of impulse buying. I usually have to sit there and weigh the pros and cons before I purchase anything. Especially if even if it's not a large purchase. I'm going to be fair. Even if it's not a very expensive purchase, I will look at it and say, is that a want or is that a need? Do I really need it? Can I get away with not having it? Right? And if there's something and it's on sale and it's a really good value, I will stand in the store with my phone and research that item before I purchase it. I want to see the reviews. I want to see what people have to say is wrong with it, like everything.
But that also doesn't come back from being an autistic trait. That can also come back to being not brought up in a supportive family too, or the combination of the two. It's
really hard to know what's trauma-based, right? So yeah, that's a thing. When you're autistic, it feels like everyone was given a manual for the rules of civility and you were not. It's like, I don't know how people know these things. Like, how do you just know things?
So you're pretty much referring to the unspoken rules.
Yes.
Right? And your ability to read body language.
Well, the thing is, I'm really good at reading body language. I'm really good at reading facial expressions. I can probably tell you how you're feeling before you know how you're feeling.
And that is not the norm for even neurotypical people.
What I can't do is understand the intent behind it. So I could see that someone is irritated very quickly. And that's kind of like a survival mechanism, right? To learn to do those things. That was one of my special interests, was to observe people and figure out why they were behaving the way they were behaving. So I put a lot of study and research into that over the years.
Which is not the norm.
Right. No,
For a
that
person
is
with
definitely
autism. Okay.
no.
I just-
Actually, a lot of late diagnosed females do this.
Okay.
That is an internet phenomenon.
So
that we
this
talk
is contradictory to a lot of what we teach in a school environment, because one of the main teaching components is teaching students with autism facial expressions.
It's a misconception. Yes.
So
Yeah.
so we do that. So there are, specifically your son, right? When he would do naughty things, and I would frown a certain way, and I'd say, "Look at my face. This is not happy." Right? I'm not impressed with what you did. Right? Because he was doing something naughty. I mean, underneath, I was like laughing hysterically. I was like, "Good for you. You figured that out, and how it would like ingenious, but not, you can't do that."
Well, we can't promote the negative behavior, even if it's
Absolutely.
funny. Yeah, that's hard.
So part of that is, often you do have to break down, and there are times there are students of mine that are, able to very effectively communicate and have a conversation and look at me and go, "Well, why are you looking at like that?"
Yeah.
And
Alex
I
would say to me, "Why do you have angry eyebrows?"
Yes.
Right? So he understood that was anger, but the intent behind it, like where did that come from? So it's intent. I can't read intent.
Yeah. So when you're much younger, it's also not being able to read your facial feature itself. You have to make a connection, right? That this is happy, this is sad, frustration, and sad could be misconstrued quite often, right? So we have to break down the subtleties of looking at that expressions, and then layer in the intent behind all of those.
So boys and girls develop differently, right? I would love to see us do some research into trans people and see how they develop, if that follows, their gender at birth or their transgender. Like I would like to have that information. So I can't speak to that, but I can speak to boys and girls. So they develop differently, right? And part of that is the whole nature versus nurture thing. But girls tend to be more social in the way our society runs. So we focus more on teaching girls also social behaviors more than we teach boys, right? Mm-hmm. So it is both things. So part of my interest was behavior, and that's true for a lot of girls who are autistic growing up, and you because you're working so hard to fit in, right? And I always found that girls were less forgiving than boys.
Oh, I agree with you.
For being accepting of someone not fitting in. Like, girls are vicious, right? And I would often go play with boys when I was younger because I was like, I think I have a boy brain. I don't think I have a girl brain, because girls don't make any sense. Like, I don't understand why this girl is angry at me right now. But the boys are just off playing, dodgeball. I'll go do that, because boys would be like, "I'm mad at you, I'm going to punch you," and then the next day they'd be fine. Like, there seemed to be like an easier set of rules to follow as a boy than as a girl. And girls were super complicated. They'd be like, "I don't think we should be friends with this girl today." And I'm like, "Well, but I don't understand why." Right? "Well, if you don't follow me in my lead, saying that we're not going to be friends with this girl, then I'm not going to be friends with you either." So you're forced into this weird hierarchy. Yeah, it's like, it's so complicated. So I just preferred to be friends with boys for the longest time, because at least they made sense.
Yep.
Right? I'm sure other people have had that sort of experience growing up. Yeah. But I've seen videos of late diagnosed women talking about those kinds of things. Right? You as an autistic girl, you latch on to a girl who's popular. It just sort of works that way. It's not like you seek them out. It's just sort of, they tend to be extroverted, mm-hmm. right? And I'm also an introvert. And And they seem to be very accepting of your quirks.
Yeah, because you're not of a challenge to them, right?
Perhaps,
Yeah, you're not competition.
right? So you get invited to things if you hung out with that popular person, right? And you're sort of safe with them. And I loved it because if they like to be the center of attention, that was great. It took all the attention off of me, which I didn't want any attention. I hated being the center. I still hate being the center of attention. It's that's too much pressure. So I'm very happy to let someone else take center stage by habit. Good.
Yep.
Off you go.
I get it.
Yeah. There's another reason why I think it's really important to get an autism diagnosis. There was this really great quote from OMG, I'm Autistic AF. And the quote was, "Why do you need a label?" And it says, "Because there is comfort in knowing you are a normal zebra, not a strange horse. Because you can't find community with other zebras if you don't know you belong. And because it's impossible for a zebra to be happy or healthy, spending its life feeling like a failed horse." And I thought, I love this analogy. I love this. This
Yep,
is spot on for me.
absolutely. Yep.
Right? Because all you can see is your deficits and how you don't function like somebody else. Right? And until you have that diagnosis that says, no, your brain works differently than those people. That's why. There's nothing inherently wrong with you. Right?
And it's also how you're exposed to that as a youngster. So, God love my son. He is the sweetest, kindest soul. And he was exposed to people with all kinds of disabilities from a very young age and would accompany me on when I went for respite work, because pretty much all but one of my respite students were boys. And he would come with me, and to him, being exposed to people with flapping and sounds and, the gauntlet of sensory needs that come with a person with autism or any other, disability was the norm to him. Because I exposed him at a very young age, and I told him and I taught him that was okay.
The whole idea of acceptance, right? Like that's the goal.
Yep. And to him, he can go out into community with somebody, and he's even at 17, nearly 17 years of age, he does come with me on occasions when I need his support. And, and he's really good with it. He's really good with saying, okay, can you make sure so-and-so doesn't go somewhere, keep them safe, and he loves it. He loves the interaction. He loves being the role model. He loves their sense of humor. And the kids that he would often come into our classroom and volunteer. And as soon as the kids in my classroom knew that he was coming, they were on their best behavior. Because they were in their elements, that they had this teenager in the classroom with them, interacting with them like he would with anybody else. And they loved it. So I think having kids exposed to having that level of empathy, not sympathy, from a very young age really does change how somebody growing up with a disorder, how they, being accepted by just that one person makes a world of difference. So
it's interesting because I like the idea of kids being integrated at the young levels, right? Like I know that some people choose to put their autistic kids into specialized programs in schools and that sort of thing, but I love having kids being integrated, because when you grow up with someone with really high needs, like a level 3 kid like Peter, that becomes normal to you, right? And kids are not judgmental when they're really small,
No, they're not.
right? Like they're not bothered, right? Peter was often the instigator of really fun, inappropriate things in kindergarten because he would be doing something, he would be stimming or doing something, and kids would be like, that looks like fun. And the whole class would end up, following the leader and doing that. And Peter's like, oh, I can make everybody do everything I want. Yeah, right. So it was like probably not great for the kindergarten teacher, but what a great experience. And he went through the different grades with that sort of same bunch of kids. And he was never treated poorly, right? And those kids will grow up to go, oh, I see an adult. Oh, what they're doing reminds me of Peter.
Yes.
So now I know what that is. I don't need to be afraid of that. I don't, right? Like they can look back on that and say, well, that's okay. I understand.
Yes, because it's no longer the fear of the unknown, of what's going to happen or what are they going to do, because they've been exposed to that.
And it's never too late to get a diagnosis, right? It's never too late.
No.
Anthony Hopkins was diagnosed at the age of 70.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I love that. As a parent, it was important to me to get a diagnosis for my kids, because I wanted to support my kids the best I possibly could. Right. So when I talked about this a little bit before, but Alex, he was just finishing junior kindergarten, and the teacher came to me with a bunch of red flags, and everything went forward from there. I took him to the doctor. We went to the pediatrician, who sent me to a developmental pediatrician. And within that, when they finally said, yeah, like the early interventionist came to the house, she did an assessment with Alex, and she said, look, I can't diagnose, right? This was just the preliminary assessment. And she said, but I can tell you through my years of experience, Alex has autism, right? And she said, I have been kicked out of people's houses for saying that. She said, but I feel like you're going to be receptive to this, so I'm just telling you. And I said, okay, like I don't know anything about autism yet. Sure, that's cool. So she goes away, and then I went through the whole list of criteria that I found online. And I went through it, and I'm like, yeah, I see some of these things. I don't see others, because Alex is level 1, so he has less support needs. Then I started looking at Peter, and Peter was 2. And I looked at Peter, and I looked at the list, and I looked back at Peter, and I said, Peter is a poster child for this. Mm-hmm. So I called her back, and I said, hi, I'm just calling because I went through the list of criteria online, and I think Peter has autism. And the first thing she did was apologize to me. And she said, I'm so sorry. Siblings, I should have thought. I should have thought to look. I said, you came for Alex. Like, don't worry about it. And she said, normally you have to go through the process of going to your doctor and going, through all those steps. She said, what I'm going to do is talk to the pediatrician and see if we can't just put Peter in at the same time for Alex and do the assessment together. And they had never done 2 at the same time before. I love breaking all the rules.
Absolutely.
So they did.
Out-of-box thinkers,
right?
And workers.
So yeah, I always tend to be the one that has the questions that no one's ever asked me that before. So Peter and Alex were diagnosed at the same time, and which also meant that even before their formal diagnosis, she came back and did an assessment for Peter and immediately put him in speech therapy and occupational therapy because he's a level 3. So he got very, very early intervention.
And I think that is right there in a nutshell is the importance of having that diagnosis. The diagnosis is accessing the ability for intervention.
Yeah. And it made a huge difference. A huge difference for Peter to have that therapy very, very early.
So I can talk about that from an educator's perspective and the importance of that. And it only carries so much weight. But you as a parent of 2 boys, one that received very early intervention, and the benefits that you saw, you can speak from experience on how significant that was.
Well, I know that some parents find that scary. right? Like they find the whole concept of it scary. They know that their life is going to change. They don't want all of those changes. They're afraid that they're going to be judged. They're afraid of how that label is going to affect their kids.
Yeah. But, it's funny that they would view that label negatively, because if I said to you, hey, Kim, my son has epilepsy, are you going to view it negatively?
Of course not. But I don't personally understand the stigma, right? Like, I know how I was treated growing up without a label, right? So I would tell parents, autistic people are going to get a label no matter what. Let's make sure it's the correct one.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? We are really good targets for being bullied, right? Because we have atypical behaviors.
And a lot of times they're very naive and easily persuaded into doing things that they should not be doing.
I am not stupid, but I am easily persuaded, which feels like a contradiction, right? If I am pressured, I will give in, right? And I like to think I am a strong, independent person, but if I am pressured at the right time in the right way, I will absolutely give in, because I am just so overwhelmed. I'm just like, sure, do it, whatever. I will just, I've had enough.
I will do whatever it takes to make it stop.
Yes,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And when I receive a piece of information, even with having a scientific background, if I am talking to you in a conversation and you give me a piece of information and it is new information to me, I will assume it's true.
Until proven it's not.
Until proven not.
Yep.
Because it's a brand new piece of information that I've never had before, and I have nothing to relate it to and no reason to doubt it. And I just tend to have the idea that people tell the truth, even though I know that's not true.
And that is a very common trait for people with autism.
It makes you feel really stupid.
So I think that's the next layer of the importance to having that label, right? And it comes down to not so much as the label, but the stigmatism, right? And I think because it's under a mental health disorder, the stigmatism is actually mental health. It's not autism. It's mental health. And I think as society, we need to actively work and be mindful on how we view that and how we treat people with mental health.
There's that whole controversy right now, right? Where younger people are going out and they're talking about their mental health issues, right? They have an online presence where they talk about having autism or ADHD or anxiety or whatever it might be. And then you hear people saying, oh, well, everybody's got autism nowadays, or everybody's got a mental health issue nowadays, right? And I don't understand why that's a problem for people. Like, why do you suddenly think, why would you be angry about that? Like, first of all, everybody used to hide these things, right? Autism specifically, it was considered that you're a bad parent and that's why your child is autistic, right? So there's a whole bunch of shame that comes with that.
Absolutely.
And
so was mental health,
yeah.
right? In that time. And if your mental health was, to, such a level, your families chose to institutionalize you. And you think, oh my gosh, how sad. How sad that society has placed these burdens on families where they have no other choice but to give up the rights to their child and award them to the state.
Because there was no supports.
Precisely. And we've come a long way. We've got a long way to go, but we have come a long way.
Well, you have people now who are coming out and saying, whether they're coming out saying they're autistic, and maybe they have a formal diagnosis and maybe they don't, and they're going to get a lot of hate saying, well, you're not autistic. I know what autism looks like. It looks like a 5-year-old boy who likes trains, right? You're a 25-year-old woman,
Yeah.
right? And you're extremely verbal and you're extremely social. So no, you can't have it,
Yep.
right? And
Education is also going to be key to this, right?
Yeah.
In educating the public on what it's a spectrum, right? Not all symptoms and signs are going to be present in every single person.
Yeah, I dislike the word spectrum because it implies a straight line, which autism is not a straight line. It's more like a color wheel, right? Where you have dots of traits, right? But it is not like a high end and a low end.
I look at you guys and I think of rainbows. That's what I do. I'm like, oh, I'm in my happy place with you guys.
There you go. I read a study that said that neurotypical people can pick up on neurodivergence in the first few seconds of an interaction. They might not know that that's what it is, but they know that that person is different.
Mm-hmm.
And they oftentimes will have a negative response to it.
That's sad, isn't it?
It's yeah.
Sad.
Yeah.
It really is. It makes me sad as a human to think that it's out there.
So learning to mask is like your earliest trauma response, right? That's your earliest survival instinct, is to hide it so that you are not treated. I don't have the numbers offhand. I think it's like 22% more likely to have suicidal ideation as an autistic person. I think that's a UK number. I think it's something along the lines of 80% likely to be unemployed as an autistic person.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like there is a lot of negativity towards autistic individuals out there.
Yeah. And I think, to me, when you are diagnosed and you receive a formal diagnosis, it gives you the access to funding and to be able to have those early interventions, right? So I think people have got to embrace the labeling as a means of an access card.
You don't have to give your label to anybody you don't want to.
No.
It is part of your medical record. It is personal. So
and private.
If I go for a job interview, I don't need to tell them that I'm autistic. And I sat in on a webinar specifically looking at trying to get a job as an autistic person. I sat in on that for my son Alex. And the people giving the webinar were saying, oh, well, absolutely tell your employer and they have to give you accommodations. And I'm it was quite a large number of people, and they were all saying, but if we tell them, they won't get hired. My son will not get hired if he puts down that he's autistic. Companies do not want to give him a job. They do not want to have to give him accommodations. And that response was ignored by the people giving that webinar. It's like, you're educated people giving me this information, but you're not taking the human element into it. Yes, when you are in a job and you are past your probation period and you ask for accommodations, yes, the company has to give them to you, but they don't have to hire you off the bat.
Nope, they don't.
Right? So my recommendation would be not to tell them, because so many autistic people are unemployed, right? And it feels so wrong to withhold that. It feels deceptive.
Yep.
Right? And autistic people, I think that we tend to be very truthful, right? We prize, honesty.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that goes for any reason, right? Even if you're I use the example of epilepsy. You don't have to tell your HR that you have epilepsy upon your interview or being hired. It's, if you're a pilot, it is the criteria. Yes, you have to have your medical health as a criteria being hired. There's specific jobs that that type of information is required and necessary. But in general, no, it isn't. So the label I keep going back to is it gives you access. It gives you access to funding. It gives you access to resources. It gives you access to intervention. So use it to your benefit. Use it to your discretion. not somebody else's, not what society says, but yours.
I think when we start learning more about autism in the general population, and employers realize what great employees autistic people make.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, you give me a task with high attention to detail and you leave me alone to go and do it, and you stop asking me to go to meetings, right? And you just let me go do my thing, I will be super productive. Right? But putting me in a meeting for 3 hours will destroy me. I can't sit there and do that. Like, horrible experience. Like, water cooler talk, not interested. Right? No, just let me go and do my job.
Yep.
Right? But people want that social component, right? They feel like, oh, well, that person doesn't participate in our, what did you do over the weekend? I don't care what you did over the weekend. I'm sorry. We're coworkers. I understand that there's a politeness to it, but I want to go and do my job.
Yep.
Right? So people don't like that.
And that's going to take time, Kim. That's going to take time to change people's mindsets about that. And but it's going to take it's going to be a collective change. It's going to have to be from both sides, right? People are going to embrace who they are and embrace the label, and and then collectively work together with changing everybody else's mindset. So is it perfect? No. Is it come a long way? Yes. Has it got a long way to go? Absolutely. But it's going to take one step at a time. And I think where we have, we've discussed the labeling gives us, and getting a diagnosis gives us that access. I think our next podcast is we're going to be coming up with funding, and how to access all of that. And that's a labyrinth of information, and is in a topic unto itself, because it's going to be heavy on the clinical side, because you need that information. And we're also going to add that information onto our website so that people can have access to that.
Yeah, I'll put all of that in the description.
Absolutely. That's your forte over there.
Yeah, I'll do the behind the scenes stuff.
So I think we'll pick up on our next podcast with funding on how to, to take now your diagnosis and apply it to accessing all of that funding.
Absolutely. Thanks for tuning in. If you know someone who might find this episode helpful, feel free to share. Also, check out our website and socials linked in the description.